The mysterious death of 21-year-old Tommy Burkett on December 1st, 1991, has led to numerous theories as to what actually happened. And I'm going to tell you straight up, the police initially said that Tommy did it to himself. And by the end of this segment, you're going to wonder who in their right mind could think that. A junior at Marymount University in Arlington, Virginia, Tommy was found dead in his parents' home in Herndon, Virginia, while home for Thanksgiving weekend. On the evening of November 30th, 1991, Tommy visited a friend's house in Centerville, Virginia. He left around midnight and was captured on an ATM camera making a withdrawal, during which three unidentified men approached him. At 2 a.m., Tommy called his parents, informing them he'd be home by noon for a family outing. The following morning, as his parents were leaving the house to run errands, they heard squealing tires. Witnesses later reported seeing Tommy's blue Mustang being chased by a larger, dark vehicle. Despite these events, Tommy's parents were unaware of any immediate danger. They returned home that afternoon, left again for another event, and upon their final return around 6 p.m., they discovered Tommy's lifeless body in his room. The scene presented several inconsistencies. Tommy was seated on a sofa, a magnum in his hand, with a wound to the head. However, the cylinder was unlatched, and there were no fingerprints on the weapon or cartridges. Additionally, Tommy's glasses, wallet, and driver's license were missing. 2 days later, his parents found his driver's license in his dorm room, turned in by an unidentified student. These irregularities raised immediate suspicions. Further investigation by Tommy's parents uncovered more troubling details. Neighbors reported seeing Tommy's car being chased and run off the road on the day of his death. Some even witnessed a dark sedan parked near the Burkett residence around the time of the incident. Weeks later, Tommy's mother noticed small reddish stains on the home's stairway, which a bloodstain expert confirmed as spatter inconsistent with a self-deletion wound. These findings suggested a violent altercation occurred elsewhere in the house. Seeking clarity, the Burketts had Tommy's body exhumed for a second autopsy. This examination revealed unexplained abrasions, bruising on his right ear, and a broken jaw. Additionally, Tommy had made 2 911 calls in the months leading up to his death, both of which were mysteriously deleted from official records. When his mother inquired about these calls, authorities initially acknowledged them, but later denied their existence, further deepening the mystery. However, some have suggested that this may have been a misreading of a computer screen by administrative staff. A potential motive emerged from rumors that Tommy had been acting as an undercover informant for the DEA at Marymount University. It's speculated he uncovered substance activities on campus, which may have led to his targeting. However, the DEA officially denied any connection to Tommy, and no concrete evidence has substantiated this theory. As of today, Tommy Burkett's death remains officially classified as a self-deletion, leaving many questions unanswered and his case unresolved. There's simply too much that doesn't add up for anyone to confidently say, Tommy Burkett ended himself. From the missing fingerprints on the weapon to the second autopsy revealing potential signs of a struggle, this case all but screams foul play. Once you lay out the actual timeline, nothing really appears to fit the police theory. Tommy being chased by another vehicle, neighbors noticing strange activity, his missing identification mysteriously reappearing in his dorm room, the previous 911 calls. None of it adds up to self-deletion. But here's the catch. When authorities failed to conduct a thorough investigation from day one, they essentially stack the deck against getting any real resolution. Critical records go missing, potential eyewitnesses aren't fully vetted, and leads slip through the cracks. Over time, evidence is lost or becomes inadmissible, and witnesses' memories fade. That means if there really were perpetrators involved, if Tommy was in fact silenced for something he knew, They're probably in the clear now, unfortunately. Once law enforcement starts with a certain assumption and refuses to deviate, it poisons every investigative avenue that follows. Ultimately, a shoddy initial investigation doesn't just shortchange Tommy and his family, it virtually guarantees that the truth remains buried and justice is never achieved. Big shout out to subscriber and YouTube member Bumblebee48 for this great suggestion during a live stream. Remember, if your suggestion makes it into a video, I'll give you a shout out as well. Hit me up in the comments or join the Discord. Jack Quinn, born on January 7, 1940, was a trusted figure in the banking security industry. As Vice President and General Manager of Federal Protection Services, he oversaw operations for a company that provided security and armed guards to banks and other financial institutions. His company handled millions of dollars in cash daily. On the morning of April 9, 1988, Quinn arrived at his office early, as was his routine. A supervisor named Harry Goldberg was the only other employee present. Throughout the morning, Goldberg observed Quinn in his office, appearing calm and composed. Unbeknownst to Goldberg, Quinn was executing a meticulously planned theft. He spent the morning inside the company vault, transferring cash into boxes. Quinn loaded approximately $1.3 million in untraceable bills into the trunk of his company car and placed an additional $107,000 into the trunk of his personal vehicle. After securing the money, Quinn asked Goldberg to follow him to his home, where he left his personal car. He briefly spoke with his wife, then returned to the office with Goldberg. Quinn then departed alone in the company car, which contained over $1 million, and drove to Palm Beach International Airport. Upon arrival, he transferred the money into suitcases and vanished without a trace. Investigators found no evidence of him boarding a plane, renting a car, or taking a taxi from the airport. Quinn's disappearance shocked his family and colleagues. When he failed to return home, his wife contacted his office, but received no information about his whereabouts. The following day, she discovered $107,000 in the trunk of their car and a letter from Quinn admitting to wrongdoing and expressing his inability to face the consequences. She promptly turned the money and letter over to the police to help further the investigation into her missing husband. The investigation into Quinn's background revealed troubling details. He had previously been suspected of stealing $70,000 from a former employer before joining Federal Protection Services. Also, how the heck do you get a job at a place where you're in direct control of extremely large sums of cash without very significant background checks? I wonder what the implications of this apparent lapse was for any insurance policies covering such losses by Federal Protection Services, but I wasn't able to find any info on this. Additionally, the IRS was pursuing him for a substantial sum in unpaid taxes, which may have motivated his crime to avoid financial ruin and potential incarceration. There were also reports of Quinn engaging in an extramarital affair, with suspicions that he used early morning hours to meet his girlfriend before work. In 1992, the FBI was alerted to his then current location, Houston, Texas, when he took out a fraudulent driver's license in the name of one of his family members. Despite extensive efforts, authorities have been unable to locate Jack Quinn. The authorities believe he may have assumed the alias Calvin Clucky and could be residing in Hawaii or near Baltimore, Maryland, as of the 1990s. Also, just a little piece of advice. If you're gonna go on the lam, choose a name like William Davis for your fake identity. Calling yourself Calvin Clucky is just asking for everyone to remember your name. People will start calling you Plucky Calvin Clucky and won't be able to forget you. If one were to adopt a William Davis type persona, it's generic enough to be forgettable, but not generic enough to raise suspicion like, let's say, John Smith. But I digress, let's get back to the case. Since he's fluent in Spanish, some have suggested that he may have fled to a Latin American country after his close call in the Lone Star State. The FBI believes that he is potentially still alive, and there's an active and ongoing investigation into his location. Personally, I'm a big fan of the "he fled to Latin America" theory. Jack Quinn fleeing to Mexico in 1992 is highly plausible given its proximity to Houston, his Spanish fluency, and the border's looser controls at the time. With access to cash, forged IDs, and overland routes, he could have crossed discreetly and vanished into a major city like Mexico City or a tourist hub with large expat communities. Mexico's cash-driven economy and enough cultural similarities make it an ideal hiding spot, while its jurisdictional challenges can complicate U.S. law enforcement efforts. Quinn likely avoided detection by keeping a low profile, moving frequently, and relying on cash to evade paper trails. I think the most likely way this one gets cracked is if he ended up having another family after going on the lam, and they connect on a genetic testing website. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a shout out to all my subscribers, patrons, and YouTube members. Remember to hit the like button and share this video with anyone who's curious about the unknown. Gettysburg's reputation as one of the most haunted places in America is deeply tied to the Civil War. The Battle of Gettysburg, which occurred over 3 days in July 1863, was one of the conflict's deadliest, with over 50,000 casualties. This immense loss of life has led many to believe the area is haunted by the spirits of those who perished there. Across the battlefield and in various historical sites, people have reported ghostly encounters that seem to keep the past alive. Devil's Den is one of the most notorious spots in Gettysburg. This rocky formation witnessed intense fighting during the battle, and some say the spirits of fallen soldiers linger. Visitors have described seeing ghostly soldiers appearing and disappearing among the boulders, and many hear inexplicable cannon fire and the screams of men. One eerie phenomenon noted is that cameras often malfunction in this area, as if the energies present interfere with technology. Nearby, the triangular field is another hotspot for paranormal activity. Confederate soldiers took positions here during the battle, and many died. Modern visitors claim to have seen their apparitions moving stealthily through the field. The ghostly cries of soldiers and distant drum beats are frequent occurrences, adding to the unsettling ambiance. On numerous occasions, visitors have felt cold chills or an unseen presence passing by. The hauntings extend beyond the battlefield. The Jenny Wade House is another famous location. Jenny Wade, the only civilian casualty of the battle, was killed while baking bread for Union soldiers. Her death occurred when a stray bullet penetrated 2 doors and struck her in the back. Today, her home serves as a museum, and many visitors claim to feel Jenny's presence. Some have reported hearing footsteps, doors opening and closing on their own, or even catching glimpses of her shadow moving through the house. Sachs-covered bridge, built before the battle, is another eerie site associated with Gettysburg. Legend has it that 3 Confederate soldiers were slain there after being caught trying to desert. Today, people report seeing ghostly figures in the area surrounding the bridge. Some even claim to smell smoke, suggesting the lingering presence of these soldiers. Iverson's Pits, where Confederate soldiers from North Carolina were ambushed and killed, has had a long history of ghostly sightings. The mass grave where they were buried became a place of fascination as reports of eerie lights and spectral figures emerged. The atmosphere of Gettysburg, charged with the memory of thousands of deaths and the remnants of Civil War violence, often elicits heightened responses from visitors. The combination of the town's history and its eerie landscapes like Devil's Den and Triangular Field, and the power of collective memory, creates an environment ripe for ghostly sightings. Further, visitors primed with tales of the supernatural may interpret natural sounds or sights, like fog patches, shifting shadows, or sudden chills as paranormal encounters. This psychological phenomenon, fueled by the town's haunted reputation, blurs the line between reality and imagination. Anyway, I'd love to hear in the comments whether you've had any bizarre experiences at Gettysburg. The 1896 H.G. Shaw incident is one of the earliest recorded cases of an alleged alien encounter, taking place long before the wave of UFO sightings and abduction stories that became common. On November 25, 1896, Colonel H.G. Shaw, accompanied by his friend Camille Spooner, was traveling by horse and buggy through the countryside near Stockton, California. Shaw was a well-regarded man in his community and was in charge of organizing an exhibition for an upcoming fair in Fresno. The quiet journey was abruptly interrupted when their horse froze in terror. The cause of the animal's fear soon became clear. 3 humanoid figures emerged from the roadside, described as being around 7 feet tall, with spindly limbs and hair covering their bodies. Shaw and Spooner noted that these beings had large eyes, small mouths, and no noticeable ears. Shaw's description of the beings goes further, detailing how they communicated in a strange, chirping manner and carried bags with hoses, which they appeared to use for breathing. The beings also possessed egg-shaped lamps that emitted a soft glow. When the two attempted to interact with the entities, Shaw reported that the beings made efforts to abduct them. However, the aliens were unsuccessful, seemingly lacking the physical strength necessary to overpower the Shaw and Spooner. Also, I just realized as I was editing the video that I called him the Shah, like he's the Shah of Iran or something. I thought about fixing that up, but since it gave me a sensible chuckle, I've decided to keep it in. After failing to kidnap Shaw and Spooner, the beings retreated towards a bridge, where their cigar-shaped craft hovered over the water. The spacecraft itself was described as roughly 150 feet long and 25 feet in diameter. As Shaw and Spooner watched, the beings gracefully leaped into the air and entered their craft, which then swiftly ascended and disappeared from sight. Shaw was convinced that the beings were from Mars, a common belief during the era when the notion of Martian life captured the imagination of the public. Some speculate that this was one of the first documented alien abduction events in the modern age. Others have speculated that the story was made up by local papers at the time as a sensationalistic way to sell papers. And if you know anything about the newspaper industry in the 19th century, well, let's just say that hypothesis doesn't sound half bad. Another theory suggests that Shaw and Spooner needed an explanation for why these two opposite-gendered quote-unquote friends took so long in the woods. And yeah, under that theory, they came up with Martians. The ancient Druids have long held a place in popular imagination, often depicted as mysterious and wise Celtic priests deeply connected to the woods. Over the centuries, Druids have been romanticized and reimagined, and today there are groups who consciously identify as modern Druids, drawing inspiration from ancient Celtic spirituality. The ancient Druids flourished in Celtic cultures primarily between approximately 300 BC and the Roman conquest of Gaul and Britain in the 1st centuries BC and AD respectively. The word Druid likely derives from a combination of Proto-Celtic terms, suggesting an association with oak trees and wisdom. Oak trees held symbolic importance and were closely associated with the natural world that Druids revered. The Druids were active in regions spanning parts of modern-day Ireland, Britain, and continental Europe, wherever Celtic tribes settled. Though their influence varied over time and geography, Druids appear to have shared certain broad similarities. They acted as intermediaries between people and the divine. They held responsibilities in passing on tribal and natural lore and delivering legal judgments, and guided magical nature rituals. One of the main challenges in studying historical Druids lies in the limited primary sources available. The Celts, including the Druids, passed down their traditions orally and didn't maintain their own written records. Much of what we know comes from descriptions by Greek and Roman authors, including Julius Caesar, who wrote about the Druids in his commentaries on the Gallic War. Caesar described them as a class of priests who oversaw religious ceremonies, served as judges in disputes, educated the youth, and wielded considerable political influence. The Druids' religious practices focused on maintaining harmony with nature and the spiritual realm, often involving sacred groves, which were forest clearings considered holy places. Trees, especially oaks and mistletoe, featured prominently in their rituals. Okay, so I've got to address an extremely popular misconception about Druids here for a moment, and some of you are definitely going to have your minds blown by this fact. While popular culture frequently associates Druids with Stonehenge, historical Druids didn't play a role in the construction of this Neolithic monument built millennia before they existed. That said, it's open to interpretation whether the Druids used Stonehenge as a holy site, but most modern scholars think these are modern inventions. Modern Druidry, sometimes called Druidism, has taken root as a nature-based spiritual path embraced by people worldwide. And yeah, they missed the opportunity to call it Druidism in my view, but perhaps not everyone is as big a fan of wordplay as I am. Many modern Druids are motivated by environmental concerns, a desire to reconnect with the natural world, and an interest in Celtic mythology and spirituality. Modern Druid rituals often revolve around the seasonal festivals associated with Celtic traditions, such as Samhain, as well as the solstices and equinoxes. Also, I found out a couple months back that Samhain is actually pronounced Samhain, but honestly, I don't think most people would know what the heck I'm talking about. On July 16, 1993, the quiet community of Arnold, Pennsylvania, was shaken by the brutal slaying of 74-year-old Stephanie Coyle. Living alone in a modest garage apartment behind 4th Avenue, Coyle was known for her kindness and active involvement in the local senior center. Coyle's body was discovered by her landlord after she failed to report for her volunteer shift at the New Kensington Senior Center. I'm not going into the details of the crime because they're simply too brutal, but let me just give you an idea with reference to what the experts are saying. Dr. Cyril Wecht, a renowned forensic pathologist with 50 years of experience, described it as one of the most brutal slayings he had ever encountered. Despite extensive investigations by local law enforcement and the involvement of the FBI's Behavioral Crimes Unit, the case quickly went cold. Over the years, various leads were pursued, including the possibility that the killer was someone familiar with Coyle, or at the very least, the neighborhood. In the decades following the slaying, Coyle's family, particularly her son Dan, has been relentless in seeking justice. They've offered rewards, distributed posters, and hired private investigators to unearth new leads. Despite all this, no meaningful new leads have been turned up at this point. Recent advancements in forensic technology have rekindled hope for a resolution. In 2024, the Westmoreland County District Attorney's Office announced the hiring of Texas-based Othram Inc. to evaluate DNA samples from cold cases. This is a company which has been mentioned a few times before in this series that aims to generate new leads through genetic genealogy. It was confirmed later in 2024 that Stephanie's case wouldn't be one of the first cases looked at by Othram, possibly due to investigative elements that haven't been released to the public. For instance, the authorities may have a very good idea who the perpetrator is, and if that perpetrator's deceased, there may be more pressing cases to solve first. Otherwise, I find it difficult to justify how such a truly brutal slaying wouldn't be on the absolute top of any such list for genetic genealogy investigation. I remain cautiously optimistic that I'll have a resolution to this case to report on in a future episode of this series. Shout out to Axe Onslaught for giving this obscure suggestion on a recent live stream.